Hello, my name's Rona Arato. I'm a children's author, and I write books for young people about issues dealing with human rights. Several of my books deal with the Holocaust, and the book I'm going to talk to you about today takes place after the war and deals with the fate of some of these survivors who were trying to find a safe place to live. The Holocaust happened between the years 1939 and 1945, when 6 million people were killed simply because they were Jewish. Those who survived found themselves homeless in most cases, without family, without money, and many of them were living in displaced person camps, waiting for countries to let them come in. The young woman I've written about in my book, her name was Rachel Fletcher, and Rachel, or Rachel, because that's the Hebrew pronunciation, Rachel had one dream from the time she was a little girl. She wanted to live in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, which at that time was called Palestine. She wanted to live in a Jewish state. Now, after the First World War, the British government had promised the Jewish people that they could have a state in Palestine, that they could have their own country. Britain was ruling the area at the time, but they did make a promise to the Jews. Unfortunately, that promise wasn't kept. And after the war, when refugees were desperate for a place to live, the British were keeping them out. During the war, they wouldn't let them in either. Before the war, when people were trying to find a place to get away from the Nazis, the British were blocking them from coming into Palestine. And after the war, that continued. The Haganah, which was the Jewish Defense Force in Palestine, organized a series of secret voyages, ships that would bring Holocaust survivors and refugees into Palestine. Some of these made it in. Most of the people ended up in more displaced persons camp. But the ship that Rachel and her mother and sister joined was one that made history. It was the biggest of all the refugee ships. It had been purchased by the Haganah. It had been a luxury liner before the war, a troop ship during the war. The Haganah bought it. It was designed to hold 300 people, and they outfitted it to hold 4,500 people. They tore out the ballroom. They tore out all the fancy furniture and filled the hold, the bottom part of the ship, with bunks. And in secret, they loaded 4,500 refugees onto the ship in the port of Marseille in France. The idea was that they were going to sail to Palestine, run the ship aground on the beach. Everyone would get off the ship, mingle with the Jews living there, who would then smuggle them inland and hide them in their homes so that they could live in the Jewish state that they were dreaming of. It wasn't yet a Jewish state. Okay, what happened is that when the ship got into the ocean, British warships surrounded it, and eventually the warships rammed the ship, which had been renamed from the President Warfield to the Exodus 1947. Exodus, of course, referring to the biblical story of Moses leading the Jews out of slavery in Egypt. The British rammed the ship. Then British soldiers and sailors boarded it. There was a huge fight. The passengers defended themselves with whatever they had. The British had batons and guns and tear gas. The passengers had potatoes, onions, and cans of soup and tinned beef. The fight lasted for a number of hours. 3 people were killed. Many were wounded. And eventually the ship was towed into the port of Haifa. And there the people were taken off, put on 3 prison ships, told that they were being sent to Cyprus, where the British had more displaced person camps. But instead, the ships eventually ended up back in Germany. This made headlines around the world. And news that the Holocaust refugees had been taken back to Germany, where many of them had to be dragged off the ship, and there were pictures of them being beaten and clubbed, went all around the world. And eventually, when a vote came up in the United Nations to establish a Jewish state along with an Arab state in Palestine, world opinion turned the vote, and the state of Israel was declared in November of 1947. It was voted on in November of 1947, and in May of 1948, the president of the Jewish community, David Ben-Gurion, who became Israel's first prime minister, declared the state of Israel. And at that time, Rachel, her mother and sister, boarded a proper luxury liner and sailed to their new home in the Jewish homeland. And that's what the book is about. But there's more to the story than that, and I'm hoping you'll read the book and you'll learn what Rachel went through and why she was so determined to live in a Jewish state so that nobody could ever again persecute her and her family and the Jewish people for just being Jewish. Thank you, and I hope you'll read the book, and I look forward to hearing from you with questions about this, The Ship to Nowhere, and my other books. My other Holocaust book is called The Last Train, a Holocaust story, and that's the story of my late husband's journey through the Holocaust, his stay in Bergen-Belsen, and the miracle that saved his life. So thank you again, and keep reading.